Okay, so have you seen this? Unfiltered. The wild side of desire.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's quite a title.
It definitely grabs your attention, right?
Yeah.
It's for a proposed podcast episode, actually.
Yeah.
And just from the outline, it looks like it could be pretty wild.
So what's the episode actually about?
Well, it's called Exploring the Depths of Pleasure. Fantasies, boundaries, and everything in between. And they really do seem to cover it all. Fantasies, kinks, societal norms, the impact of technology, even a would you rather game thrown in there for good measure.
A would you rather game. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Right. So let's dive into this outline and see what they've got planned and see if we would want to actually create this wild episode.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so you jump right in. First topic, fantasies.
Well, everyone has those, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense to start there, I guess. What's their angle?
Well, instead of just listing common fantasies, they focus on one specific scenario, being tied up.
Interesting. Why that one, I wonder?
Well, they talk about how it's not just the physical act, but what it represents. Surrender, vulnerability, trust, that psychological layer really adds depth.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what are we really drawn to in our fantasies? Is it just the physical sensation, or is there something deeper going on?
I think that's the question they're trying to get at.
Yeah.
But do you think starting with something like that, being tied up, risks alienating some listeners? I mean, not everyone's comfortable with that kind of imagery right off the bat.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
It could be a bit intense for some, especially those who are new to exploring this side of themselves or maybe haven't really thought about their fantasies in depth.
Exactly. And we don't want to shut down the conversation before it even begins.
Right, but I do think the outline emphasizes the importance of normalizing conversations about desire, even the stuff that might feel taboo or a little bit uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, breaking down those barriers.
Exactly, like with kinks and fetishes. It suggests tackling the misconceptions head on, particularly around BDSM, which often gets a bad rap in the media, right?
Totally sensationalized, misunderstood.
Yeah.
BDSM is a perfect example of how important education and open dialogue are.
Absolutely. It's about understanding, not judging,
Completely.
Yeah.
And creating that safe space for listeners to confront their own, maybe preconceived notions as well.
Right, to challenge those societal norms that tell us what's acceptable and what's not when it comes to desire.
I like that. Because really, who gets to decide that, right?
Exactly. It's about personal exploration and figuring out what works for you within safe and consensual boundaries, of course.
Absolutely. And speaking of boundaries, that's another key theme in this outline. They talk about the importance of communication, which seems pretty obvious, but it's harder than it sounds, right?
Oh, for sure. Especially when you're talking about desires and fantasies that might feel vulnerable to share.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to approach those conversations?
Well, they actually suggest some practical strategies for that, which I think is super helpful because, let's be real, these conversations can be awkward, even in the most, established relationships.
Totally. Where do you even start?
Right. And imagine if they actually had expert advice woven into the podcast, therapists, sex educators, people who really know their stuff.
That would be incredible to have that kind of guidance and insight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would make it feel so much safer and more approachable, don't you think?
Definitely. Okay, so we've got fantasies, kinks, communication, all big topics, but then they bring in another layer, technology.
Yes. Can't escape that these days, can we? Dating apps, social media, they've completely changed the game when it comes to how people connect sexually and otherwise.
It's a whole new landscape. And this outline doesn't shy away from that. It acknowledges both the good and the bad.
Which is important, right? Because technology has opened up so many possibilities for exploration and connection, but it's also created new challenges.
Totally. Like navigating consent online, dealing with unrealistic expectations, even safety concerns. It's a minefield out there.
And I appreciate that they're not pretending it's all sunshine and roses. They're acknowledging the potential pitfalls.
Right, because it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of it all. But we need to be mindful of the risks too.
Absolutely. Responsible exploration is key.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Fantasies, kinks, societal norms, communication, technology. It's a lot to digest.
It is, but they do a good job of breaking it down into manageable chunks. And then just when you think it's getting too heavy, they throw in that would you rather game.
Right. A little bit of fun to lighten the mood. I'm actually curious what kind of scenarios they'd come up with.
Me too. It's a clever way to get people thinking about things they might not have considered before.
And maybe even spark some interesting conversations with their partners.
Exactly. Make it a little less intimidating to talk about these things,
Totally. And then, to wrap it all up, They propose an open Q&A.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Giving listeners a chance to ask anything they want, no matter how personal or embarrassing.
Right, it creates that sense of community and shared experience.
And it shows that they're really committed to creating a safe and supportive space for these conversations.
I agree. So what do you think? Could this proposed episode actually make a difference?
I think it has the potential to, if it's done right with sensitivity and respect, it could really help to break down the stigma and shame that surrounds desire.
And empower people to embrace their sexuality in a healthier, more fulfilling way.
Exactly, to understand themselves better and to communicate more openly with their partners.
That's a powerful vision. And it leads us to a question that I think is really important in today's world. How does technology reshape the future of intimacy and relationships?
Ooh, that's a big one. I mean, as our connections become increasingly virtual, what happens to the human need for touch, for physical intimacy?
Right. Is it possible to truly connect with someone through a screen? Or are we losing something essential in the process?
I don't know the answer to that,
Yeah.
but I think it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. And maybe this proposed episode, with its mix of personal exploration, expert insights, and even a little bit of fun, could be a good starting point for that conversation.
I think you're right. It's a complex topic, but it's one that deserves our attention.
Well said. So, to anyone listening, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep talking.
And remember, it's all about respect, open-mindedness, and honest communication.
Couldn't have said it better myself.